Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the double legendaries and the implication of that for Ret Paladins. If you follow my channel at all, then when the Covenant legendaries came out in the PTR, I said right then that I believe that we're going to be able to use two legendaries, one Covenant, one regular, and that ends up being the case. Now, for some specs and classes, there isn't a ton of implications to this because the Covenant legendaries aren't strong, so maybe we'll see them get buffed or whatever. Our legendaries are kind of middling compared to some other classes. They're all, not all of them, but we have multiple legendaries that are decent, but none of them that are like over the top, like Venthyr Boomkin, for example, is one. I think Fire Mage has one. That's really ridiculous as well. We don't have any that are over the top. We have just have some solid ones, but they do have some interesting implications of being used together. So right now, if you are a Ret Paladin, if you're just going for the most damage in general, you're just going to be playing Kyrian. Kyrian's pretty good at everything. It's the best single target thing in the game. Not in the game, but in the game for Ret. It's the best single target. And, you have the 1 minute build, which is, generally really good. For some people, I know Zeal ends up being better than Execution Sense, but generally speaking, you have the 1 minute build for Ret. And this is the best, and you're going to be using the Divine Resonance Lego, which is the strongest legendary currently for single target. And I'll be looking at some simulations for legendaries here in a moment to kind of think of maybe how they're going to work together and how to be really optimal. We might need to be switching covenants based on what you're doing. So it might be worth it to kind of level up the other covenants if you haven't already. I have already done Venthyr, but I might be looking into doing Necrolord as well. We'll obviously get simulations as soon as the stuff hits the PTR client. 9.2 hits the PTR client. There'll be simulations, I'm sure, run on this, and we'll know for sure. But the point of this video is kind of have fun with it and kind of think out loud of what we might be getting. So let's go ahead and look at these simulations for the Ret legendaries and kind of talk about them a little bit. So let's go to raid boss. It's going to be single target basically, right? So Divine Resonance is the best. Don't let these bars fool you. You might think that some of these are really good, that they're just to scale. So this only goes up to 8% over here. Ravenous Frenzy, or whatever it's called for Venthyr Boomkins, they're legendary. That goes up to like 20%. So almost 3 times as strong as our Divine Resonance. So for single target, Divine Resonance is really good. This is simulated. It gives you the stuff it's simulated. 4 to 6 minutes is what this is set at. Last simulated 2 weeks ago. The site is called herodamage.com. It's similar to Blood Mallet. Some people say that this one's better. I think they're both fine, but I'm just using this one because more of the high-end type people kind of use this one more. So you have Divine Resonance as the best single target. Now, we do have Duty Bound Gavel here. Now, I wasn't even aware of this. I know it got buffed at one point, but the Necrolord Legendary is not that far from Divine Resonance. I think that might set up some interesting things. Final Verdict, that's just the straight single target legendary. Relentless Inquisitor is up there. Magistrate's Judgment a little bit behind that, but very similar. And then that's pretty much all you use. Mad Paragon might be used a little bit if you're Venthyr, but that's kind of it. Now, notably, the only two that are decent currently, as far as damage, are Divine Resonance and Duty Bound Gavel. Also, the way Night Fae Ret works, no one's really going to want to play Night Fae Ret because all the buffs are better to give to somebody else other than yourself. And it'd be like a Shadow Priest, playing Shadow Priest by choice, just to give PI to other people. Like if they had an option to play other classes that were stronger even, and then they're like, no, I'm just going to play my Shadow Priest so I can PI X person in raid instead. So you're not going to get Night Fae, even if they buff it, I don't think. Like, they'd have to buff Night Fae significantly. So we're basically down to 3 covenants. Radiant Ember is not good for single target, obviously. Ashen Hollow is much better for AoE in general. It's not that it had potential early on, but it's also not going to get buffed because of Holy Paladin. We have to think about that as well. So you kind of have Divine Resonance versus Duty Bound Gavel as your main Covenant legendaries. And then so for single target, you'd obviously use Final Verdict for that if you're only going to be casting Templar's Verdict. But then you have things like Relentless Inquisitor and Magistrate's Judgment. If you are using Divine Resonance, there are going to be some interesting combinations there where it does cast Judgment, which means Magistrate's Judgment will work directly with Divine Resonance. And that could cause that, each on their own might be something, but when you pair them together, it might have like instead of a linear impact, it might have a bit of an exponential impact, which could be really good. Final Verdict will also pair well with Divine Resonance, just because you'll be potentially able to get another Verdict into the 1 minute build. So that's another option as well with the improved Final Verdict. So those are the options single target. So right now, I assume what single target's going to be is Kyrian, Divine Resonance with Final Verdict, maybe, and then if you're going to be AoEing at all, probably Divine Resonance with Magistrate's Judgment, but we'll see how those work together. That's something to keep an eye on, is how Divine Resonance is going to work with Magistrate's Judgment. That could possibly tilt it up a little bit higher even, and make Divine Resonance even more valuable by the way it works together. If you don't, I might as well go over this because a lot of people probably don't even know what Duty Bound Gavel does. But Vanquisher's Hammer, that's the ability, the Covenant ability, gains 1 additional charge. So instead of 1, you get 2. An additional cast of Templar's Verdict will automatically trigger Divine Storm. So you just get like a free Divine Storm as well. So it's kind of like just a free ability cast. And that's why it is pretty strong. It's not a weak ability at all. So now let's go look at Raid Boss with ads. That's the way that they frame this here. I assume that just means that you're casting your AoE abilities. Now, in general, so this is going to be probably some single target, sometimes you're AoEing, right? So simulation-wise, Magistrate's Judgment is way at the top, so that's not a Covenant one. Tempest of the Lightbringer is pretty high up there. Then you have Radiant Embers. That's the best Covenant legendary, sim-wise, right? This is just how they sim it. We'll see how it works out when it actually goes. But yeah, Radiant Embers is the top one, and then Divine Resonance will be next. Let's look at the difference between those two. 5.7 sim and 4.4, so only about 1%. So we'll see. Again, Magistrate's Judgment is going to have interesting interactions with Divine Resonance, whereas Magistrate's Judgment will not have interactions with Ashen Hollow. So that could put that above there. So generally speaking, and Duty Bound Gavel is not that far below either. So you have a lot more options here. In theory, we'll see. One of these is going to end up simulating better than the others, obviously. But it looks like likely in this kind of scenario, you'd want to wear your Magistrate's Judgment, and then, Venthyr could be viable for this type of fight. If, again, the hardest thing for Venthyr Rat, if you haven't tried Venthyr Rat, you've been Kyrian the whole time, the hardest part is finding where to put your Ashen down where you get full use out of it. Obviously, Holy Paladins have the same issue, and I'm sure that they've gotten really good at knowing when to put it down and everything like that. And you'll find this perfect times for you. The other thing is you have to make sure that the boss doesn't get moved out. The tanks might need to be doing something, but they need to keep it in your Ashen Hollow anyways. So that becomes an issue as well. It's not the funnest thing to play, at least for me. But if it ends up being the best, it ends up being the best for this type of fight. Again, I assume that this means sometimes it's single target, sometimes it's AoE. I assume it doesn't mean constant AoE. Otherwise, I think we'd see some different things at the top, like the Dungeon Slice we're about to look at, which is kind of, constant AoE for the most part. So what I think is going to happen here, obviously Magistrate's Judgment is so far ahead in this type of fight, 12%. You're probably going to see that with Divine Resonance be the best thing. So again, you kind of have a Kyrian thing going on still. But there possibly be some other options. Maybe Radiant Embers ends up being really, really good. You get the Magistrate's Judgment with it. Maybe you switch to that for this kind of fight. I probably necessarily wouldn't unless there's really good times to put down Ashen Hollow to get the full uptime of it. In that case, it could be an option. But probably Kyrian here as well. So let's recap. Single target, it's probably going to be Kyrian, but we'll keep an eye on Duty Bound Gavel for single target. But probably Kyrian. Raid Boss with ads, the way they frame it here. Probably going to be Kyrian with Magistrate's Judgment for this. And now let's look at Dungeon Slice real quick. So Dungeon Slice is just kind of like AoEing all the time, like pulling a bunch of ads. Obviously, there is single target in Dungeons as well, but this is very heavily weighted towards multi-target. Now, what we see here is Duty Bound Gavel at 7.33%. Again, not a super high percent in general, but if you go look at the next one, Divine Resonance, it is significantly higher, about 3% higher. So, if nothing else, this is the one where, in Tempest of Lightbringer, obviously, is going to be the top legendary, other than Duty Bound Gavel. Dust to Dawn is actually not terrible. But what I think you're going to see here is, for Mythic Plus, it might actually just behoove Rhett to play Duty Bound Gavel to play Necrolord, and then Tempest of Lightbringer with it. That may end up being the best thing, because Divine Resonance, it's solid, it's solid, but we do have the option to switch now, to switch Covenants. So you would want to use Divine Resonance with, like, honestly, I don't even know, probably Divine Tempest or Tempest of Lightbringer. Magistrate's Judgment, again, a lot of this is going to depend on the implications of those working together, Divine Resonance plus Magistrate's Judgment. So we'll see with that. But I did think it was interesting. The Duty Bound Gavel is pretty good. It's been completely off my radar. I knew that they buffed it, but I haven't really been paying attention to it. Because it's not really useful too much in this current patch. But once we can add other legendaries, it might be a little bit more useful to use another legendary with it. So one last recap through here. I like to think out loud, get this stuff on record. I think for single target raid boss, it's probably going to be Divine Resonance with Magistrate's Judgment or Final Verdict. We'll see. One of the two. Duty Bound Gavel, we'll see. But I do think Divine Resonance plus one of the other two, and we'll see which one of the two it is. Raid boss with ads, I think a lot of people will stick with Divine Resonance plus Magistrate's Judgment there. I think it's going to give a little bit extra value to Divine Resonance. And then you'll see maybe some people will play Venthyr for this type of thing, but again, that's very situational. Now that you can switch Covenants, if it's one where it's hard to get full uptime on your Ashen Hollow, I think it kind of disqualifies it, honestly. So we'll see there. And then for Dungeon Slice, I do think, based on these simulations, Duty Bound Gavel will end up being the way to go. So if you are a rat that likes to do Mythic Plus, it might behoove you to get up your Renown all the way up with your Necrolord Covenant. And that's something that I will be working on as well, just in case. You never know. And we don't know what's going to be changed. Ashen Hollow could get buffed for only ret and not for Holy, for example, which would be the bigger issue. So we could see where that goes. But generally speaking, Kyrion's probably going to be the way again, because Divine Resonance is currently the best single target legendary. Kyrion will probably be the way for 9.2 for the final raid tier of Shadowlands. And it'll probably be the best in general one if you don't want to switch Covenants. But if you only do things like dungeons, maybe think about going Necrolord and taking a shot at that. So also, it doesn't hurt just to max out Renown on multiple Covenants now. You may be able to just switch between fights or switch between contents that you do. So we'll see going forward. Obviously, I have more firm information as we get the simulations. As this hits the PTR, I'll be on the PTR testing out myself, and I'll have more concrete information for you then. This is obviously more of just a mind crafting. It's not really even theory crafting. It's just kind of thinking about it a little bit. So that's about it for this video. As always, I do ask you, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out so much. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.